Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this very special digital workshop from Episcopal Parish Network and our friends at Christ Church Short Hills. We are thrilled to have you here today to hear about the upcoming film on the Philadelphia 11, and to have one of the Philadelphia 11 with us, Nancy, and the producer and concept person behind this film, Margo, and the rector of Christ Church Short Hills, Bowie, with us. They will do more formal introductions, but I am Joe Swimmer. I'm the executive director of Episcopal Parish Network, and I welcome you to this session. If you don't know anything about Episcopal Parish Network, or your parish is not a member, we invite you to find out more and to join us in this work, similar programs similar to this throughout the year, as well as our annual conference. We're just really thankful that you're taking time out to hear a little bit more about the story and about the film and how you can support it. Christ Church Short Hills is one of the grantors to make this film happen. And I know that without additional support, it's hard to put the whole thing together, but you'll hear more about that in this session. So without further ado, any more babbling by me, I am in awe of this program, of Nancy and of Margo, and of course of Bowie, who will be our moderator, and I'm handing it off to Bowie now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, hello, good afternoon. I'm the Reverend Bowie Snodgrass, rector of Christ Church in Short Hills, and like many of you, I first heard about this film through the Kickstarter, and I gave some money and I got this really awesome tote bag in the mail, and I stayed on the mailing list. And I'm also on the planning team for Episcopal Parish Network, and I was organizing a workshop on stewardship and crowdfunding, and decided to invite Margo Guernsey to be part of the workshop at the annual meeting in Jacksonville to talk about her Kickstarter. And in our discussions, I also encouraged her to apply for an outreach grant from Christ Church, which was granted and was used to fund the trailer, which premiered at the Episcopal Parish Network. So it's been a wonderful partnership between EPN and the film, but this film is really many people being involved in many ways. And over the years, I'm sure you will hear more about all of the connections that people have personally to the production of this film. Margo, can you introduce yourself?
Of course. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Bowie, for having us. My name is Margo Guernsey. I am an independent documentary filmmaker, obviously, or maybe not so obviously. I work and live in Watertown, Massachusetts, which is right next to Boston. I use she, her pronouns. I am not Episcopalian. I was raised in a UCC church, but I will say through the process of making this film, I've attended quite a few Episcopal services and they feel very familiar. We all come from an Anglican tradition, and so I do feel at home with you all. Before I became a filmmaker, I was a union organizer, and I also have a master's in history. And so in a lot of ways, these things have all come together in this film. All of my films focus on untold stories of resistance, and that's exactly what this is. So it's been a real pleasure over 8 years now to be working with Nancy and the other ordinands. And I think now Nancy maybe should introduce herself.
I'm Nancy Wittig, and I was ordained in 1974 in Philadelphia and became one of the Philadelphia 11 many years ago now.
Well, some of you have seen the trailer and some of you haven't. So to begin, we're going to briefly show the new trailer, and the film will be forthcoming in the fall.
Here we go.
My mother said to me that I had told her when I was a little girl that I wanted to be a priest. She and my dad both said, well, that's wonderful, honey, but that's just not what girls do.
A heated debate has been going on in the Episcopal Church on whether women can serve as priests.
There's no reason why a woman couldn't be president or a judge or a number of other things. But the one thing that she absolutely cannot be is a model.
I get so tired of being decided about behind my back.
The oppressor cannot be the instrument of the liberation of the oppressed. And yet in this structure, women do not have the power to effect their own liberation.
conservative and liberal and progressive and radical and right on the edge. We were not the same by any means.
The phones were ringing off the hook. One woman said, "Are you people going to ordain women there today?" And I said, "Yes, we are." And she said, "You're going to split this church right in half." I said, "The church is already split in half. That's why we're doing it."
Proceedings here enacted are unlawful and schismatical.
It is simply a role which a woman cannot fill.
God shall be called Father, and so shall his priests.
There were all these lights. NBC, ABC, CBS were out there with their big cameras, and it was like, my goodness.
It was so clear that we were being called to that day, and we were willing to stand, and we would not be denied this.
The Episcopal House of Bishops today ruled invalid last month's ordination of 11 women as priests.
We kept going to parishes that want us there as priests. Of course, we're called a bunch of man-hating dykes, bitches and shrews and all of this stuff. At some point, what was going to happen to us, of course, was a big question.
The 11 little priestesses all in a row, you know, like the little Indians. I'd be delighted if they'd go away.
Cannot wait to settle questions of the freedom of all of humanity. Women are either free in our society or they are not.
There's a saying, you know, you need to speak the truth even if your voice shakes. And that's what I did.
It got a little glitchy there. I'm sorry if that happened to you all, but we'll share a link later and you can stream it at home and it won't be glitchy.
Margo, how are the 11 women featured in the film, and who are the main storytellers?
Yes, that's a great question. From the very beginning, we were intentional about wanting the women who were ordained in Philadelphia that day to tell their own story. And the main storytellers are 5 of those women, basically those who are really still with us today and could fully participate in the film. But there are many other places in the film where we have some wonderful bites, mostly in archival and in other ways from some of the other women. And so their voices are all there intertwined. There are a few other people in the film also who were main participants of the film. So again, not historians who are telling us about the past, but other people who participated, such as the Bishop Barbara Harris, Reverend Peter Beebe, folks like that.
And I just saw in the chat that Betty Powell, who's one of the Washington Four, who are also ordained in 1975, is here on the chat. Nancy, in the film, you say that the world was changing and the country was changing. Can you just give us a little sense of the context leading up to 1974 and the choice to move forward with this ordination of 11 women in Philadelphia?
Well, the actual issue of the ordination or leadership of women in the church had been going on for a great while. More recently, in 1970, in the Houston General Convention, it was finally admitted that women could be deacons. Now, we have to remember that in the late 60s, that Bishop Pike ordained Phyllis Edwards a deacon, and he got into terrible trouble about that. But 1970, when women could become deacons, and then 73, the ordination of women to the priesthood came up. And it was defeated, but that's part of what led to it. The other part is that some of us knew about a story about how in China that a British bishop had ordained a woman as the British were leaving China when the Japanese were taking over, and so he ordained a woman a priest, and she carried on ministry for a number of years and was living until fairly recently. So all of that went into some of our understanding that this was not foreign. This was something that we could also be a part of.
Yeah. And in the 11 women all were deacons already.
Yes, yes, we were all 11 had fulfilled everything within their diocese of what they could. Some had standing committee permission, some had vestry, none of us had all of them, because depending on the congregation, etc., they were hesitant to go ahead without the national church moving on it.
Yeah. We can come back to some of the history later or in the Q&A, but I also want to talk about the production of the film. Margo, what drew you to this story and how did you start working on it?
I read the autobiography of Polly Murray's autobiography, and if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. It's a very engaging read, and her description of the service, she was there in Philadelphia for the service, and her description of the service will draw you in. I mean, it's just the way that she talks about being there and how the Spirit moved her and moved everybody. Really was my first introduction. And then I reached out to Carter Hayward because I actually was considering making a film about Polly Murray. And so I reached out to Carter to find out what their relationship had been like and how they knew each other. And in that phone conversation, Carter, in order to answer those questions, and she was by no means trying to tell me her own story, but she really needed to talk about it in order to explain how she knew Polly Murray. And it was just something about the way she described the movement above and beyond what Polly described in her autobiography. I consider myself a student of the civil rights movement and of that era. I had never been told this, and I immediately thought, this is ridiculous. And it's always been a story to me that resonates across faith traditions and across other kinds of boundaries, because it's about being told you can't do something, not only because of one thing, and in this case, it's your gender. And it's also about changing our cultural institutions in a way to be more inclusive. So it's about how do we go about doing something that feels impossible, and we can do it. And these women really were trailblazers. So it's become somewhat of a calling since then to tell the story.
Watch out for the Spirit. She's very busy. She doesn't let up.
Nancy, what was it like for you when you first heard from Margo about being involved with this film, and what has it been like kind of remembering and reflecting back on the past 50 years?
Well, I don't actually remember how they made contact with me, but however they did, I was willing to listen. And, there had been so many kinds of crackpotty things that had happened that I think most of us had a high level of suspicion. Then we began to hear about it and hear about the women doing this. And once I met them, I was blown away. I thought, yes, this is a group I can talk about and with.
I was telling Nancy the other day, I also don't remember why it happened that she was one of the last that we interviewed. So we started interviewing in 2015, and we met Allison Cheek and Carter Hayward, and we did a whole lot. We would talk to Meryl Bittner and Marie Moorfield Fleischer. And I don't know why it took us so long to find Nancy, but I do very, very clearly remember the day that I got her contact information. And I called up Nikki Bramley, who is my colleague in this, and I was so happy. It was like this moment of, we found Nancy, we're here. And so why it shouldn't have taken so long, I don't know why it did, but it was a good thing.
That's all right. That's one of the things that we made a pact, the 11 of us, and that was to honor each other, even though we were all different, but to honor each other and to allow that to be how we related. And that's still the case.
Yeah.
Margo, you've been working on this project for 8 years now. Yes. Can you tell us a little more about the journey and the process to get to this point?
Yep. Yeah, Never expected it to be 8 years, although it's pretty common in independent documentary for it to take this long and much longer. So we're really among the average. But there have been a number of things that have been, I think, a blessing to the project itself because it has taken longer. I mean, it won't surprise anyone here that it's taken a little bit longer because of the challenge of finding the financing for the production. But in and of itself, that has, over the past, I'd say 3 years, really gotten us focused on continuing to build this movement. And the film really, really has been financed by regular people who care deeply about the story. And I mean, to the tune of, we're still figuring, you know, making sure we add people's donations together and figuring out exactly how many donors we have. We have close to 1,000 donors, well over 2,000 donations. And it's really, you know, every time something comes in, I just feel like there's someone else working with us and on this journey with us. And so that really has been a blessing. We've also, for the past 18 months, had a group that some of you have heard of called the Film Funders Circle. It's a group of laywomen and clergy who've been meeting every 3 weeks and have really become just a joy to work with and a great group. And many of you are on the call right now, but that in itself has also been a blessing. And there are many ways that that over this time, the film has gotten better. So the film that you will all see has been improved because of this process. This, you know, people have been able to give feedback as part of the process. More collaboration, I think, always makes something better. So when something is created out of a movement, I do think that the whole thing improves. So I think the process has been there. It's just been a wonderful process, albeit a long one. I'll just say one other thing about this, which is I figured out the other day that in the meantime, I made, finished, and released another film, which was never part of the plan, but just to give you a sense for the length of time. So if you're curious, that film is called No Time to Fail, and it's about election officials in the 2020 election. So that's just how long it's taken to get to the end of the process.
Well, another Holy Spirit thing is that it will be released to the public in 2024 for the 50th anniversary of the Philadelphia 11.
Exactly.
There is a cut of the film. All the licensing isn't done, and the color correcting and the sound editing. But Nancy, you've seen it, and when you finally saw the film, how did you feel? Were there parts that were exciting or parts that were difficult to watch?
Well, it was exciting to kind of see it and just, oh yes, I remember that. No, I don't remember that as much, but so there was it's very difficult to when you've become the focus of a process to appreciate its meaning, both for myself or for other people. So for me, it was a reminder of a great deal of the pain. There was a lot of pain in those days, as there are today, or is today. And I think that there was no one part that was the most painful or whatever. It was just a reminder. But also at the end of the film, I could sort of rejoice in the fact that we did it, and we've survived in one way or another. And so it's been a very it's been a blessing indeed. And to get to know Margo and Nikki, who did the filming and are doing all the really hard work, I'm most appreciative, because it's a reminder that yes, this was important. It was something to keep the story, because in the meantime, there'd been many other kinds of additions to the story which were not true. And so the film is remarkable. I can't wait to see it with all of the things that have finally been smoothed out. So it's exciting. It's very exciting, and a reminder that issues of justice and issues of compassion never end. And so there's always work to be done, always a step to be taken, always a willingness to stand up and be counted.
Yeah. Margo, the film begins in around 1970 And it goes all the way through the Philadelphia 11, and then a lot of focus on 75, 76, and the process between the convention in 73, all the way to the convention in 76. And then it goes all the way to 1988 with Barbara Harris's consecration. Can you just say a word about that timeline?
Yeah, we for a few years, we really struggled with where to start and where to end. And then there was actually a cut of the film that we actually played with, finding a way also to start with Barbara and end with Barbara, since she did carry the cross. But, you know, as with all of these projects, and for those of you who, if you haven't made a film but you've written a book, it's very similar in that you write drafts and you reorganize and you write another draft. And it just, you know, we really wanted to bring people back emotionally to what it was like for the 11, for the women and in general. And the best way to do that felt like it was to really to focus in the 70s. And so, yeah, it does near the end sort of bring us full circle to Barbara's consecration, but the bulk of the film is in that period so that we can all be there on this emotional journey and feel like what it was like.
Nancy, in the film, you talk about finding out that you were pregnant after the ordination, and that then you had a second child. I'm a priest and a mother, and it's still something that I'm juggling with, and I talk to a lot of other women clergy about. Can you just say a word about that part of your journey? I know that you, in the film, you said people really made an issue of you.
They did. Well, both of my children grew up being taken from church to church and service to service. And so they are very independent in their thinking. And I think that the main thing that always, well, I remember, for instance, that at the time when I was having children, my colleagues, had already had their children, but they weren't taking care of them. And I, for the most part, I would write sermons on the movable dishwasher and have little cups of peanuts and M&Ms that I would bribe the children with to be quiet so that I could think or answer a phone or what have you. So it was many times a struggle, but near the end, there was a wonderful experience I had in a little church in New Jersey, and there was really no office, so that was in the breezeway of my home, of the rectory. And periodically my son would come through and say, "It's 9 o'clock, time for this meeting to end." And the first time I was embarrassed, and the second time I thought, that's not a bad idea.
I know someone who says after 60 minutes, the Holy Spirit leaves the meeting.
There you go.
Sometimes a child will lead us. Margo, the film is going to premiere in October, and you're still working that out. And then there will be screenings beginning in November, and people who have donated about $500 can get a license to organize a screening. What is your hope for the impact of the film?
Yes. Honestly, my biggest hope is that these screenings can generate deep conversations. I think some screenings will be organized where there's space for that. Some screenings might be in theaters and there's less space and time for that formally, but also there will be time for this informally. Discussions about what the journey these women went on and how that resonates today. There's a lot that is in the film that will feel very familiar to us today, whether it's regarding how queer folks are treated, how women are still treated. Some of the same things are still around. And so I think there's a lot of space for thinking about this film, thinking about what it means for us today, and then to walk out and continue to take action. I also really hope that the tool becomes a gift and can be shared, from church, as we get into the 50th anniversary, can continue to help lift this, these voices up, and also potentially build bridges between other faith traditions who might not understand that Christianity is not what it is in the media in America these days. It does not have to be a racist Christian nationalist view, right? That is how most people still see it because of the media. And so to understand that there are that is actually, there's another way to understand Jesus Christ, and there's another way to be faithful. I think that if this story can help open up those conversations, that would be a huge step forward.
I think one of the other things that comes to my mind is that so often people don't spend the time talking about their faith. And usually it has to happen in a small gathering. But that is so important for everyone to get in touch with what it is they really believe and how they believe it. And we are Christians, but I think it's only been in the last 50 years that we hear much more about other religions and have a better understanding of the importance of being able to sort of articulate that faith.
Well,
there's one other thought I wanted to share. When you see the film, you'll see that at the end, the Reverend Meryl Bittner, who has since come back to the Episcopal Church, but she left the church because she was overwhelmed with the backlash and the trauma of what had been a few years that were really hard of being in the spotlight. And in her speech that she gives to the press when she leaves, she calls on everybody to listen to their hearts and to do what is right despite the institutional rules that may surround you. And I really hope that that becomes a calling after people watch the film, to sit back and think, am I listening to my heart and doing what's right, or am I following along with some rules that I may not agree with?
Right. So important. And thank you for bringing that up again, because it's how our hearts are changed just by one another.
Nancy, what is your hope that people will learn from the film and from your story?
That no story is simple and it involves many people and many different moments. I think if everybody looks to their own life and begins to find those places where they could have, or they could, or they will stand up and be counted, I think that's particularly important, because for a long time, it sort of, we let the institutions speak for us, and that was valuable. But now we need to begin to speak for ourselves as people of faith, and stop being divided by false divisions. We need to allow each other the space to get in touch with where they need to be, and then to encourage them to be there. It's not an easy thing to do. It wasn't easy back then, but I think that it's important that people get in touch with their own hearts and allow those hearts to speak honestly, and that they will find a lot of grace in that.
Well, thank you both. I'm going to start going through some of the Q&A, and either one of you, Nancy or Margo, can answer these questions. There are a couple of questions about drawing non-Episcopalians to the film. Margo, you did mention how Christianity is portrayed in the media, but I'm also wondering about interest from Catholic women or Orthodox women in this project. Yeah. How do we draw non-Episcopalians to this bigger story?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer I'm hoping is that the distribution can help. If there is and here's my plug, local film festivals really love to program films if they know people will come. So if you have a film festival in your hometown, that is, churches are going to be a really glorious way to screen the film. Film festivals bring an ecumenical community-wide audience immediately. So a very thing we can do in the short term is advocate that local film festivals program the film. So if you have a local festival, reach out to them, let them know it's there. You can reach out to us and I can submit it. Next year, the distribution for the first year will be screenings hosted by anyone who wants to host, really, and we'll share more information about that later. And then for the 50th, we're hoping to have it streaming and potentially also some other ways to distribute to a wider audience. Catholic women, since we started sort of building a movement for support back with the Kickstarter campaign, Catholic women have been very connected. I've reached out to a number of Catholic organizations. They've reached out to me. So I think I saw in the chat, I've been having trouble following along, about there are Catholic women priests. They have had a harder time. That institution is much harder to change. And so they have not gotten the attention that the 11 got. And they have been silenced. So they've been ordained, just like Nancy and her sister priests were, but they are, they've been more of an underground. They just haven't gotten the attention, and it's been harder to make change in that church. But there are a number of Catholic women who are working really hard, and I know they're going to screen the film, and they're very excited for it.
Nancy, how have you made peace with the hostility and opposition over the years? You seem very peaceful now, but it was certainly a difficult period.
Well, it was. The longer you live and the more you see and hear, and we certainly have done that in this most recent time, there are an awful lot of people who are afraid of so many different things. And fear seems to be an important aspect of humanity. But a great deal of wonderful things, of wonder, can happen without fear. And my hope would be that people begin to look at their fears, and we've got all kinds of things happening now in our society that are not new. They're just more of them and bigger. and I think it's terribly important to remember that each of us has a voice, and wherever you find yourself, use that voice in a way that is appropriate, so that you can begin to allow other people to do the same thing. It doesn't seem really very hard. Jesus didn't have to deal with buildings and things like that, but he did go around and get people's attention, and particularly the women. So we have to remember that, that it was women all along that began to help change and make the church into what it became and is continuing to change into.
Yeah. There are a couple of questions about why it was less controversial for women to become deacons. And there was a deaconess movement even earlier in the church, and some women deacons in the Bible. And I do pray that there will be women deacons in the Catholic Church and Orthodox Church in my lifetime. But can you speak about that, about why maybe it was easier to get deacons, female deacons?
Well, because certainly in the Episcopal Church and in the Anglican Church, deaconesses were an order that were created. There were also nuns, but deaconesses tended in this country to be in the inner cities, in the Appalachia. Most of my seminary education, which was a mere fraction of what it is today, was supported or underwritten by the women deaconesses and their ministry. I remember one telling us that a priest would come around, every 2 months to give communion, but what do you do in the meantime when people are dying or children are being born and need to be baptized? And so there is a reminder that the Holy Spirit has been busy throughout time, and we forget that. It's nothing new.
Which of the women are still alive today? Which of the 11 women, or which of the 15 women?
Oh, I just broke that down myself this morning. Carter Hayward, Emily Hewitt, Meryl Bittner, Marie Fleischer, Alla Bozarth, and me.
And then
pass those.
Did you write down of the Washington Four?
I did not, but Betty Powell, it was one of them, and I'm trying to think. One of them was Diana Tickell, I think, from Alaska, and then there was a remarkable woman who worked in the State Department and who sued the State Department and won. And I'm trying to think of her name.
Allison
Palmer, yes. And there was somebody else.
Lee McGee, yep.
Lee McGee.
Four, right. I think there are two who are still with us, Allison Palmer and Betty.
Right. Yeah, they say that the Washington ordinations were important because it let the church know that the women were serious about this, and it was causing all kinds of chaos among the brethren.
Friends, we're happy to have more questions in the chat. Margo and Nancy, what else do you want to share about this film and this story?
Well, I think part is that every one of us of the 11 were people, just regular people. There was nothing particularly special about us, or that we had any given particular talent. I mean, perhaps some of us didn't understand that hitting our head against the wall was going to be painful, but I think that what's important from it is to understand that no matter who you are, male or female, you have the possibilities to live out of your own lives in a way that can help others do the same. I mean, when I was in Philadelphia as in the diocese as a priest, the African American women of other denominations were amazing. There was a woman who started her own church because she found out that nobody wanted to do sign language, and so she started a church that does sign language among people who don't speak, and she was amazing. And I saw her ministry and was impressed by it and loved by her people. And those are the kinds of things that I think are so powerful.
The women who were ordained did cover quite a range of ages. What was the youngest and the oldest age of the women who were ordained in Philadelphia?
Well, I think I was one of the youngest, and I think, what was it, about 27 or so to 79. Somebody just wrote down on the.
Thank you, Margo, public historian, Heather.
Very important. You can't have, you have to have a community, a village.
Yeah.
I think that's what the film does. It reminds us that there are many different people who are all part of the story. They're part of each of our stories, and that that's what makes us who we are and gives us the strength to do things that initially we might not have thought we could do.
There's a question here about that there were some women who were invited to be ordained and declined, but there was only a limited number of women who were sort of eligible. Can you, either of you, speak to that?
I think the question also asks what's covered in the film. Well, do you want to speak to it, Nancy? I mean, I can share that in the film we do. Oh, okay. Yes, that there were, about 40 women. So they made the decision to only to present for ordination. You had to be, like, if you had been a male, you would have already been ordained. So you had to be ready to be a priest in every other way. And there were about 40 people who were ready. So there's also a question of why Polly Murray wasn't included, and that's the reason, is she actually was still in seminary. She had just started seminary. She wasn't ready yet in terms of her process. But then, everyone who was ready was called, and 11 said yes.
We called something over 50 women, I think, and the deal was you had to have been a deacon for 6 months, because that was sort of the tradition then that the men had been, and so we all took turns calling all the women that we knew who were ordained. And at that point, we pretty much, though a small group, we pretty much knew all the different women, thanks to Sue Hyatt. Sue Hyatt was our bishop until Barbara. But Sue was a community organizer, and that was what was so important. The whole concept of community organizing. I remember when people asked, what is a community organizer, when they were talking about Barack Obama? And I said, well, just watch.
There's a question here about the fact that the ordinations took place at the Church of the Advocate in Philadelphia with Paul Washington. Can you speak about that?
Well, it's not a big surprise because Paul Washington had a wonderful reputation and of putting together all kinds of groups of people. And he brought the early Black Power group together in Philadelphia. And it made a lot of sense, was that it was a church in the midst of one of the worst areas in Philadelphia. It was poor, beleaguered, and Paul Washington cared about it. And Sue Hyatt was from that diocese, and so was Bishop DeWitt. And so that they already knew that this might be a place that would be open to doing something that might be a little controversial. After all, they had had a whole bunch of other African-American groups in that threatened a whole bunch of white people in Philadelphia. So, you know, it was one of those things that it wasn't a surprise. Paul always had his ear near the ground and was very conscious of how to help move things along.
Mm-hmm. Margo, there are a number of questions, but how do we get people in our diocese involved? How do we help activate folks, you know, in the lead up to the distribution?
Yeah, I mean, there's also a question I think that we passed about a viewer's guide, and I wanted to say, yes, the answer to the viewer's guide is we are working on one. That's one of the things we still need to figure out how to fund, but we would very much like to have a viewer's guide available because these screenings are going to be really important. And what you can do is plan to host a screening. So we are a tiny team. I mean, I work freelance, Nikki works freelance. You know, we've hired people to do some of the jobs on this film on 1099. Right? Everyone's working from home. We have no, and they do. So we are really just, in some ways, me with people who collaborate. And so the film will be screened when people locally say, let's screen it here. And so we will be here as a support team. But it really, what you can do is plan a screening, and you know it does take some effort to put a screening together, and that's what you can take on. And everybody can also plan it in a way that best works for your community. So this means location, time of day. You can choose to have it be a free event open to the public. You can make it private. You can charge tickets. If you do sell tickets, the revenue is for you. You can use it to support the expenses of the event. Yeah, we'll be here to support you all, but plan to host a screening.
And I'll just say, you know, we're hoping to do a screening and we've just begun conversations. Of course, we could do something easily in the parish hall, but we want to do something bigger with more impact. We want to do something coordinated in the diocese and be able to advertise the diocese. There will be, you know, X number of screenings in these different locations, maybe see if we can get it at an independent movie theater or even like at a college auditorium. So I think either anything from a very small to a very large scale is possible, and you can coordinate with other people in your diocese. Nancy, there are a number of questions about people either saying, what would you say to a woman considering ordination, or what would you say to someone who is going to be ordained soon? And also, how do you keep your fire kindled?
Well, you have to say your prayers. And you have to be a part of the world and to see what's going on. And how do you, I don't know. I think it's just something that you pray that the Spirit will continue to move you, even in those moments when it seems she seems very absent and you seem very dry. We've all had those. I've had a hard time with retirement, but I'm catching on now. But I remember at Christ Church in Short Hills, there was a man who was a rector at that time, tall, white hair, on the standing committee. And so I was invited there to preach. And it was amazing. But it was also one of those times when you looked around and you thought, it's going to take a while for a number of women to increase. And so it has, and they have. And I have been very happy to meet many of them who have a real sense of the calling, because I think that's the important part. Is this is not just a membership thing. This is something you give your life to, and it's never over.
There's another question here about the geographic spread and the different dioceses that the women were from. I'm assuming some bishops were more supportive, others less so. What was the spread of dioceses that the 11 women came from? Were they mostly...
Well, let me start with the bishops. Bishop Corrigan was California. Bishop DeWitt was Pennsylvania. Bishop, my ordaining bishop, Katrina's father's. Say it?
Wells.
Oh, Bishop Wells was from Missouri, I think. And then the bishop from Puerto Rico came so at the last minute. And so that's, and we were scattered from all over the country. Obviously, things had moved more quickly in the East than they had in the far West. And, I just think that was just part of a reality. But that's also, I think that the West has become a little bit more relaxed about itself. So they have been ordaining women too for a while. And so, I just am so impressed with the number of women and the quality. And, I think that is the important part, is the women bishops. We just had a consecration of a bishop here in Ohio. That's where I am. And she very graciously asked me to be a part of the ceremony. And I got to get a picture of me with, I don't know, about 11 other bishops. And it was very thoughtful of her, and a reminder that there are now, I think, more than 11 women bishops in the church. and so far I've been very pleased with all of them. None of them are quite like Bishop Harris, but they all carry their own. And they're an impressive lot.
There's also a question about what the coordination has been with the Episcopal Church, with the presiding bishop's office. There have been a couple of Episcopal News Service articles. I know there's at least one presiding bishop staff person on your group. Can you just talk about, you're an independent filmmaker, it's an independent project, but how have you coordinated with the Episcopal Church and also with national organizations?
Yeah. Many of you might know that we got a constable grant which is a fund of the Episcopal Church, as part of our fundraising this spring. And so, in that way, the church, to the extent, I don't know how to represent the church, but that funding stream is, in some ways through the church. It is an independent production, and it is the correct way to do it is not to be too involved with the church whom it is about, right? Because otherwise there's a sort of a journalistic a conflict from a I can't say that word right now, but you all know what I mean. If the entity that the film is about is participating in making the film, then we all question, is this film really honest, or is this story really the truth? And so I think it's helpful that there's been some separation. We very, very much hope to have the presiding bishop come to one of our premiere screenings, and we expect that as the film continues on its journey, that we will have more, fulfilling and wonderful conversations. I hope that answers the questions.
There is a question here of that someone was told that there were male priests who were not going forward with their own ordination until women could be ordained. Is that true? And also in the film, there were 2 men who were put on trial, disciplinary trials, for allowing women to celebrate communion. Can you talk about some of the male allies that you had in the struggle?
Well, Bill Wentz from Washington, D.C. was one of them, and Peter Beebe from the Diocese of Ohio was another. And both of them went through hell. And one of the questions that we had was that the bishops and the male priests who stuck their necks out all had a rough time. And it was, I guess, one of the realities was that they didn't take women seriously enough to put us on trial. We all thought that would happen. And we realized that might be part of what we were getting ourselves into. But, you know, I think that the reality is that when something different comes along, the people who stand with that often are addressed in a negative way, and it begins to change, but it takes a number of years. You were talking about the spread of the women. Jeanette Picard was from Missouri, I think. Is that right? And then you had, I mean, Allison was still from Australia. She became an American citizen, I think, a little bit later. And so that you had a number of us from a variety of different places. But there was a pretty good spread. But we were in touch with about 50 other deacons in the country at the time.
Well, are there any final questions that haven't been answered, or any final things, Margo or Nancy, that you wanted to bring up in this conversation?
There have been a number. I've been trying to catch up with some of the questions in the chat, and I think I've missed a lot of you, and I apologize for that. The Contact Us tab on our website comes directly to my email. So if your question didn't get answered, or you want to follow up, if you use that tab, you'll get an answer via email.
And we will download the chat so that Nancy and Margo can go through it. And Nancy, there are quite a few personal notes to you for people who knew you in different chapters. So you'll be happy to see those. One of
the realities is that even though we were from looked like a fairly small area, that we've been all over the country, and others have bumped into us, and we've had some wonderful relationships with people. People who are clergy and people who are lay people. And you know, I always said all along that it never would have gone through, never would have happened. We never would have had the courage to stand together if it hadn't been for the lay women who were doing all the work and who were the real stars among us. Many of them have gone to God now, but they were certainly a major aspect of our flourishing in the church, because there were some who were upset with us, but I'd say probably the vast majority, a couple of women from World War II would say, "You go." And that kind of encouragement was very helpful.
Yeah, well, I think that this is just so inspiring to so many of us. And it continues to be inspiring. I'm on the Commission on Ministry in the Diocese of Newark, and coming out of the pandemic, there's just a whole influx of people who are discerning a call. And I do think that
I'm
this
sure
church.
Case. Yeah. Well, one of the blessings from the pandemic for the church has been Zoom church. And that means you can stay home and have your coffee, and you don't have to get up earlier than you can or want to. And that's ministering to the people that we ignored for so long in the church. If they could, you know, limp into church, they were important. If they couldn't, then, you know, we sent out the deacons and the priest would visit them, but they missed the gathering of the community. And I think that's what's so important that we've gained through the craziness of the pandemic.
Well, I'd like to thank the Episcopal Parish Network for this webinar. I think Joe said there have been about 170 webinars. So if you've signed up for this, you may get emails about future webinars, and this is a great ministry to the church. I also want to thank all of you who made time this afternoon to be here. This will be available as a video later, so that link will be sent out. I especially want to thank Margo and Nancy for your time and for everything that you've done. It is just an inspiration. And if you want to learn more about the film or a screening, or if you would like to donate, you can get all the information at Philadelphia11film.com. And I think there may even be a new website, right? Or
In the works. The biggest thing you'll see on our website right now is new website coming soon, because a lot of it's kind of outdated information, but you can still see the trailer. You can still contact us. You can follow along. You can sign up for the newsletter. So, and the new website will use the same URL. So it's still the place to go. You can find the donate information, and we will have a new glorious website this summer.
All right. Well, thank you all, and God bless. And as I said, we will download the chat so that we can share it with Nancy and with Margo. God bless.
Thank you.
Everyone.